Hello, welcome to our next session of Zooming online chess, actually YouTube online chess. Right now, I want to review some of the chess tactics that we've discussed over the last few weeks. We've been talking about looking for ways to attack your opponent to win material. Most of these tactics that we've discussed are based on the idea of attacking two things at once. Because if you attack two of your opponent's pieces at once, you will be able to capture one of them. Some of these tactics are also based on the idea of looking along straight lines of files and ranks and diagonals to see how your opponent's pieces line up so that you're better able to attack them. The first tactic that we discussed was a discovered attack. In this instance, a discovered check. Notice that along the H file, the queen and the bishop are lined up with black's king. So that if you move this bishop, it uncovers or discovers a check on the king. The queen is giving check on the king. And when the bishop moves here, the bishop is able to attack the rook. Double attack. Queen attacks the king, bishop attacks the rook. The king has to move out of check, and the bishop will get the rook. Now it is true, the bishop will get the rook, the king gets the bishop, but remember, the rook is worth 5 points and the bishop is worth 3. So white will be ahead. So that is one of the tactics that we discussed. The next tactic we discussed is where one piece attacks two pieces. In this example, we have 2 of white's pieces attacking 2 of black's pieces. In a fork, you have one piece attacking 2 pieces. Do you see how this bishop attacks both of white's rooks at the same time? In fact, white will only be able to save one of them. So we discussed discovered attacks, forks. The next tactic we discussed is a pin. A pin is a tactic that any of your long-range pieces, bishops, rooks, or queens, that move in a straight line can use. So for example, here, this bishop is not just forking the 2 rooks, but if you look down this line, then the bishop is pinning this rook to the queen. To the king. I said the wrong thing. This bishop is pinning the rook towards the king, to the king. So this rook cannot move, which means that the bishop will get the rook. Now watch this. The reason I said queen was because I was accidentally looking ahead, noticing that the bishop is not just lined up with the rook and the king, but also the queen. Now in a pin, the less valuable piece is the first piece attacked. Here, the bishop first attacks the rook, and then the king, which is more valuable. But in the other tactic that we saw, the skewer, it's just the reverse. So this rook is pinned. So say that rook is pinned. So white knows they can't save this rook. They move this rook up. This bishop takes this rook, and now instead of a pin, we have a skewer, still lined up, but the king is attacked first and then the queen. The king is more valuable. And in a skewer, the first piece must get out of the way, and this king must get out of the way, so when the king moves, the bishop is able to take the queen. So, you see, those are the 4 tactics we've discussed so far. We've discussed the discovered attack, fork, pin, and skewer. Now, we're going to go on to a different kind of tactic. This tactic is also a way of gaining material, but also a way of trying to get through your opponent's defenses. Okay, I have reset this board to start on the next tactic, which is called remove the defender. Sometimes in a chess game, you want to capture a piece, but it's defended. And so the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at how to get rid of that defender so that you can capture the piece you want. Now, just like the other chess tactics, these tactics require that you take your time, that you look at the position, and you think about all your options. If you're not looking carefully, you're going to miss those tactics. In fact, if you're not looking carefully, you might miss just free captures. So let's look carefully. in this puzzle, it's white's to move. So white has 2 rooks and a pawn. 5 plus 5 is 11, plus 1 is 11. And black has a rook, 2 pawns, and a bishop. So white is slightly ahead. 3 plus 1 plus 1 is 5, plus 5 is 10, and white has 11 points. Now, white has a couple of captures that they could do. If you look carefully, this rook would love to capture this bishop, but it's defended by the king. This rook would love to capture this rook, but it's defended by the bishop. So the question is, what can you do? And you look carefully. Now, if you capture this bishop, the king will capture the rook, but once that bishop is gone, this rook is no longer defended. And that's the premise, the basis for thinking about removing the defender. This rook is defended, so what do? Well, you just take that defender away, and you get 3 points. The king takes, and you lose 5. But now that this rook is not defended, you take that rook, and white has won 8 points and lost only 5. And now they have a rook and a pawn against just 2 pawns, and it's much easier for white to win because they got rid of black's pieces. Let me show you this in another game. Okay, now I want you all looking carefully at this board. It is a much more complicated position than what we looked at before. Just like the previous position, it is white's turn to move. And if you're playing white, you need to look carefully at what your options are. So as you look at the board, you should first look to see who's ahead. White has 2 rooks, black has 2 rooks. White has a queen, black has a queen. White has a knight, black has a bishop. We're even and equal in pieces. Pawns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. White 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So white is slightly ahead. They're what we call a pawn up. They have 1 pawn more than the opponent does. But if you look closely also, white says, oh, look, black's attacking my queen. Now my queen is defended, so you can think about whether you want to trade queens. But you should also look at not just, oh, I need to move my queen because it's attacked, or I need to trade queens. You should still be thinking about what is white attacking. So there are a couple of different attacks that white has. White's rook is attacking the bishop. And if it attacks the bishop, what happens? If it attacks the bishop, the pawn will take. But white is also attacking this rook. Is this rook defended? It is. It is defended by the bishop. So if we take the bishop, we do lose our rook, but the queen will get the rook. And so white, instead of losing or trading queens for 9 points for 9 points, they could trade the rook 5 points for 8. So let's see how that looks. We take the defender, boom. And not only are we taking the defender, but we are checking the king. Okay? So we are checking the king. So the king has to move or black has to take. They're probably going to take. So they have taken the rook. And the queen, should the queen take the queen? I don't think so. That's not good for white. We would take the queen, but the rook would take the queen. But now this rook, like we just discussed, is not defended. So we get the rook, not for free, because remember we gave up a rook. So we traded rooks. That's an equal trade, but white got the bishop. So white ended up ahead. They got 8 points for 5. And they did that by simply taking the defender. And that is that tactic that we started with, is remove the defender. That is one way to get around the defenses. Just capture them. and that allows you to capture the other piece. I'm going to send some puzzle sheets for you to look at these and see if you can also do this, but also try to think this through in your own games when we play online. See you next week.